Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and today we're going to be talking about Russia's economy, the situation unfolding between the world against Russia right now, and I also kind of want to talk to you guys personally about what's being called Russia-phobia on the internet, at least. I don't know if that's a new term or if this is something that's kind of just being made up to address what's exactly happening here. But there's a pretty major situation going on, obviously, between Russia and Ukraine. They did invade Ukraine. We've covered it in multiple videos here on the channel, talking about like updates and whatnot going on there. This is not one of those types of videos. In particular, I want to more or less talk about how the Russian economy has been affected by sanctions and different moves. And I want to talk about how the costs of these are trickling down also to the average everyday civilians of Russia, and why a lot of people online who are, it seems like, against the Russian people really should not be. And I know that may be a little controversial to say. I know a lot of people may not like to hear that, considering that there's a lot of high emotions around what's happening in Ukraine right now. That makes sense. But you have to realize that the Russian people are not the ones who wanted this entire situation to unfold. And this is kind of similar, I guess, to the message of the video I made when I was talking about how a commentary YouTuber by the name of No Fuckers was getting a bunch of hate because he's Russian, he lives in Russia, and people were basically just taking everything out that was going on there on him. So a pretty major piece of news has unfolded, at least if you're in the United States like myself here. Today, President Biden made an announcement that the US will be banning Russian oil and gas imports due to the invasion of Ukraine. If you didn't know, Russian oil and gas is the main arteries, I guess, of the Russian economy. They are two of the biggest exports that their country provides, and their gas and stuff like that is very lucrative business for them. So having the world's largest economy come forward like this and basically ban exports from your country is pretty important, right? That's a pretty massive step, and other countries have also been doing this. In fact, the United Kingdom also said that they would be phasing out importing Russian oil and oil products. Their goal, I guess, is to eliminate them from their markets by the end of 2022. Russian oil, for those of you who don't know, accounts for less than 5% of total US oil imports. So it's not like we're dependent on Russia to get gas and stuff like that. There's a lot more nuance to the situation than that. We make a lot of our own, and of course we do import it from other countries as well, like the Middle East and other places. So it's a pretty major deal though, because there's been so many different sanctions and different moves that have been made to basically cripple the Russian economy in response to them invading Ukraine. As many of you know, there's been round after round of sanctions from the United States and the European Union and other individual countries and stuff that have been basically taking aim at Russia. And in this video, I more or less want to talk about how it's affecting the average Russian citizen. So from what we've heard, Russian civilians have been protesting the war pretty heavily. In fact, the last report that I saw said that 13,000 Russians have been arrested by the government for attending and participating in anti-Ukrainian war protests, right? That's a pretty significant amount of people to be arrested. And it more or less shows that the opinion on the invasion of Ukraine and Russia is either heavily skewed or it's pretty negative, right? Like the people there, they didn't want this war. It's not like the average everyday Russian civilian is usually on the side of Russia without some sort of influence. In fact, it's pretty safe to say that a lot of the people who are in support of the invasion of Ukraine and Russia have been brainwashed in some way. The media in Russia is very strictly controlled. There's a lot of things you can't say about the government without becoming basically a political opponent. It's not like living here in the United States, man. Like here, like I said in my last video, I can say pretty much whatever I want about the government here, and that's kind of a thing that we take for granted, I feel like, in the West and in the United States and in places where free speech is guaranteed. Like, I can say fuck Joe Biden. I can say I hate the US government. I can say these things, and what's gonna happen? What, I get put on a watch list? Yeah, that's possible. But I'm not gonna have, you know, armed fucking troops come to the door and arrest me and my family, like in some places of the world. So it's definitely something that I think we take pretty for granted. Now, Russian civilians are risking their freedom, basically, in order to protest this war. And it's pretty sad because we're talking about people who don't even agree with this war in the first place, that on top, their choices right now are basically protest the war and get arrested, don't protest the war and live basically in poverty, or C, just not care and live in poverty. That's really the options right now, because these sanctions and all these moves have completely destroyed Russia's economy for the moment, right? I mean, I saw that the price of gasoline there had exploded, and the price of everyday goods was doubling, if not tripling. There's, you know, struggles to get a safe amount of food for people. You can't even really take money out of ATMs. Payment providers like Apple Pay and PayPal and all these other things have shut down service in the country, alongside the fact that all of their major banks are being targeted by sanctions. It's a tough shoe to put on right now in Russia if you're just living there, or, you know, you're in the country for some reason. A lot of the sanctions have targeted like billionaires and the rich and the government, whatnot, in Russia, but like the everyday moves that are taking place are really towards the people. So a lot of like American and Western companies have shut down operations in Russia, from fast food restaurants to clothing providers to payment providers to the video game industry. Like, there's been a pretty massive protest, I guess, against the war in Russia by Western companies and global companies in general. And I think that people don't realize that these sanctions are more or less affecting Russian civilians. I mean, just imagine this right now, right? Like, you can't go to the ATM or the bank and take out any money. And even if you could, like, the Russian ruble has collapsed completely in value, so it's not really worth anything. Your paycheck from work is worth like a third of what it was last week. You can't even really go through like a fast food joint and get anything for dinner, but at the same time, grocery stores are struggling to keep up. Virtually every business that you would go to is like kicking their company, I guess, back out of Russia and like shutting down operations. Like, it must really suck right now to live in Russia. And I hate to say that, because I don't want to, like, you know, decry the country or make it seem like a bad place, because I've never been there, but it's like, it must honestly really suck to be Russian right now when you didn't want this to happen. Everyone views you as like a global pariah now, and you can't even live a normal life. But you have to keep in mind, you know, President Vladimir Putin, the guy who started the war and the entirety of all of this Russian blood being spilled is being done in vain for, he's probably eating fucking prime rib, you know what I mean? He's eating anything he wants. He has 2 filet mignon steaks sitting on the table if he wants that. Same thing with all these military commanders and whatnot that are in this war and fighting it for Russia. The guys who aren't on the ground, they're eating fine. You know, they're eating just good. They're in their meetings with Putin, and they're eating roast and 5-way dinners and everything, right? But the people in Russia right now are paying the price for what their government's doing, and it's really, really sad to see. Because, like, to put, like, I guess ourselves in these shoes, right? Like, here in America, a lot of people don't agree with, like, the decisions and the wars and whatnot that our government chooses to fight. But can you imagine if the whole world basically ganged up on us and ruined our economy and we all had to suffer? But at the end of the day, it brings up the argument, what exactly is the appropriate response, right? Because, you know, if the West does nothing, then does Putin stop at Ukraine, or does he march all the way through Eastern Europe, taking countries one by one, in the same manner that multiple dictators before him did and started all kinds of conflicts doing, right? Or do you challenge him militarily, and next thing you know, the world ends because the US and Russia are in a nuclear war against one another? Or, you know, they went down this route, but do you sanction them economically and try to provide incentive for them to not do it by sanctions? Well, it hasn't completely deterred Russia yet. We're at this point where they're still pushing their invasion and continuing to do everything, even though this is happening. So at this point, I really can only see 2 things happening. Either A, the government's going to continue to press as long as they can until they just literally can't afford to anymore, or until they actually take Ukraine. Or B, Russians are going to start taking to the streets and becoming a little bit more aggressive towards the government, and there's going to be some sort of revolution. I mean, that's really the only 2 ways this thing, I at least can see ending at this point. And I just wanted to provide this to you to make you guys realize that the Russian people are the ones paying the price of this war. The Ukrainian people are the ones paying the price for this war. And it kind of goes that way every time there's a war. The poor people, the average people, the commoners, quote unquote, they're the ones who pay the price for the oligarchs and for the businesses and the military industrial complex and whatnot. They're the ones who pay the price for them to go to war. So if you're someone who's like saying fuck Russia and like you're being hateful towards Russian people, I really encourage you to take a good look at the circumstances of what's going on and realize that it's not necessarily their fault, and to be maybe a little bit more kind to people, because they're already suffering too. And with that being said, thank you for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel. Follow me over on Twitter and Twitch at @subtheoptimus. Make sure to check out Shop Opti down below. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, well, talking about the whole Russia situation and signing out.